This week, Phillip Wylie is with us to discuss optimizing offensive security. Then Marina Seagal from Tam Noon joins us to talk about why your cloud is such a mess. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Gnostic raises funding, the real barriers to AI adoption for security folks, what AI is really getting used for in the wild. Early stage startup code bases are almost entirely AI generated now. Hacking your employer never seems to go well. One pixel attacks on computer vision. Should the CISO be the chief resiliency officer? And proof we still need more women in tech. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. This episode is sponsored by Fastly, the application security leader and edge cloud platform behind many top digital experiences. Fastly helps organizations deliver and secure online experiences for their end users through a modern, developer-friendly approach to security. With their next-gen WAF, bot management, and DDoS protections, teams have the tools they need to ensure their applications and APIs perform at their best without sacrificing speed or reliability. Discover how Fastly transforms security into an enabler for digital innovation at securityweekly.com/Fastly. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Good Samaritan Day. This is episode 398, recorded on Thursday, March 13th, 2025. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria. Also joining us is the Dean of Data Science, the Knight of Neurodiversity, the Watcher of Data Center Waste, Jackie McGuire. How you doing, Jackie?
I did that thing. I am having a really good day despite being very sleep deprived. Yeah, so I'm also having a hard time with words and technology, and it just honestly, it feels like fourth Monday to me.
Fourth Monday, yeah. That's been kind of my week. I am also sleep deprived, so let's see how but caffeinated. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. And speaking of caffeinated, also joining us is the connoisseur of cloud security, our single origin co-host and resident coffee sommelier, Ayman Elsawa. How you doing, Ayman?
Good, Adrian. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Despite being low on sleep, it has been a great day. And very happy, ready to go.
Awesome.
I do have a quick announcement here, and then we can jump into the first interview here. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd through 6th. You can hear from 250 plus expert speakers and connect with over 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Plus, you can take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with code IDV25-SecurityWeekly. The code is IDV25-SecurityWeekly, and you can enter that at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. And both Identiverse and Security Weekly owned by the same company. That's Cyber Risk Alliance. So that's the connection there. All right, so let's see here. Today's topic is optimizing offensive security. We're excited to have Phillip Wylie with us, and he's been doing offensive security for a while now. I think Phillip, the first time I met you, might have been speaking at B-Sides Knoxville. You were submitting a lot of talks to a lot of different conferences, and I want to say that was one of our virtual conferences. We didn't get to meet in person at that point. But it must have been our either B-Sides Knoxville 2020 or 2021.
I believe it was B-Sides Knoxville 2020, but we did get to meet in person for the first time at LastCon in 2022.
Yeah. I keynoted LastCon. That was very cool getting to meet up in person. And yeah, your background. What were you doing before pen testing? I think I've only met you in your post-offensive security career.
Yeah, so I got started in offensive security in 2012. Prior to that, I spent about 7 years in AppSec, and then before that, about a year and a half in network security, and prior to that, 6 years as a system administrator back in the old
Mhm.
Novell NetWare days, back before
Nice.
Active Directory, back when Novell was the predominant network, predominant directory of services at the time, because that was before Microsoft came out with Active Directory. Only other one around that time was also like Banyan Vines, but that was mainly just
Yeah.
government, I think, using Banyan Vines.
So you
Yeah, and the
climb the
popularity of
proverbial.
Windows just deep
Yeah,
sixed it all, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You've climbed the proverbial server rack of the corporate career in tech.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember back when the servers back then were gigantic, because before HP acquired them, there were the compact
Oh yeah.
ProLiant servers, the 7000s, that were like this tall,
Yeah.
about 2 foot or taller, and it had like 4 bays for drives, but it only held like a terabyte with all those big drives in it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I managed a lot of Proliance also. We had DL380s, a lot of DL380s, but we
yeah.
had some quad Pentium Pros. That must have been 6U. They were huge. And I
Yeah.
think yeah, it was. I remember the OS discs had 4 gigs. The That's how much we gave NT4 back in those days. But I forget how much RAM it had. It was not a lot of RAM, and often it ran out. We had lots of memory leaks. Those were fun days.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. And especially if you think of on the client side, if you've dealt with any Novell workstations, how you'd have to set the memory within the client to get get it to work well, because there wasn't as much memory on the workstations back then. So you'd have to go in to the config file and set it so memory is optimized where everything works properly.
It sounds like Java. Was it Java?
No, it wasn't Java.
Setting your heap size.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, nightmares.
It's interesting though, because we may end up back there, right? I think as cloud compute costs increase and things like that, we may need to go back to a model where we figure out like how much should be being done on the endpoint versus how much should be being done in the
Yeah.
cloud. I've been thinking about that a lot lately in terms of if processing gets more expensive, like we may actually have to go back to managing, the power on endpoints to have them do some of that heavy lifting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
it's kind of
shits and
interesting.
giggles, I was specking out a Mac Studio because it goes up to 512 gigs of RAM now, half a terabyte of RAM,
Wow.
and yeah, 10 grand if you want half a terabyte of RAM in a Mac.
That's a lot. That's a lot of Chrome tabs.
That's a lot of Chrome tabs. So it's good. We're kind of going back, and this is actually where I wanted to start. It's just a term, pen testing. So we're talking about offensive security today, and I remember after doing a talk called "It's Time to Kill the Pen Test." I don't know if you've ever seen that talk, Philip, but
No, I haven't seen that one.
one of the things I did in preparation for that is I surveyed a bunch of folks on what the term pen testing meant to them, and I found the vast majority it meant web app assessment. When you said pen test, they would think specifically an assessment against a web app. So maybe running Zap or something like that. Some kind of DAST scanner. Looking for cross-site scripting, SQL injection, OAuth top 10, all that stuff. Whereas for me, and probably for you as well, Philip, if I were to just make a guess, based on how long we've been in the industry, I would guess that when we hear pen testing, it's more of the larger, any way in, network, internal, external. Sure, web could be part of it, social engineering, physical. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. Like what are we talking about today? Are we talking about the full gamut of what you could do for a red team assessment, or anything in particular?
Yeah, I think part of the thing to kind of set the stage, I think it's good to kind of define the different assessment types, because one of the things that the talk that I give, the called optimal offensive or optimizing offensive security programs kind of was a second iteration of a talk I did called Offensive Security Awareness. It was inspired by when I worked at this large global consumer product company as red team lead. And it just really didn't hit me until last year that I didn't realize that I don't think the CISO knew what a red team was, because we came in and I was playing these red team operations, but we outsourced our web app pen testing. But within the organization, people didn't know the difference. Like you're talking about when you asking the audience what a pen test was, and they thought it was a web application scan. There, they didn't know the difference between a vulnerability scan, a pen test, or a vulnerability assessment, or a red team. We had a director at the company that wanted a red team engagement done against an SAP app. So there's just a lot of confusion there. And I think a lot of us get on the same page because at the same time too, I think a lot of product companies and vendors have kind of skewed what red team is because, anyone that started out or know that that's, this is like adversary emulation. It's not a penetration test. There's a difference between the two and the lines have been blurred so much. So it's really kind of tough for people wanting those type of assessments because they don't really understand what's out there. And just like this director asking for, a red teaming against the SAP app is asking for the wrong thing. Some company that doesn't know any better, not really trying to please the customer and just gives them what they asked for and not do a little deeper digging to find out the goals. They're going to end up getting something that they don't want or end up having some kind of outage because certain type of activities being performed that shouldn't be.
So, so words have meanings, and let's find out what those meanings are with Phillip. Phillip, I'm going to fire a couple phrases at you, and you tell me as concisely as possible, like the short version, what that term means to you. So, vulnerability management.
So vulnerability management to me is doing your recurring vulnerability scans, whether it's Qualys, Tenable, Nessus, any of the Tenable products, doing that on a recurring basis. And also, I believe one of the things that needs to not be overlooked is the remediation. Remediation should be part of vulnerability management. In my view, if you're just doing vulnerability scans, that's not vulnerability management, but going in and doing remediation after the fact, and it's just kind of a reoccurring process. Doesn't replace a pen test.
Vulnerability assessment then.
Yeah, vulnerability assessment is a step between pen testing and vulnerability management. So you're doing everything short of exploitation. So you're looking for any vulnerabilities, and typically with vulnerability management, you're just running a vulnerability scanner. With a vulnerability assessment, you're running a lot of the same tools a pen tester would run, only short of exploitation hacking into it. So you'd go as far as validating the vulnerabilities, making sure they're not false positives, using other tools to do that. So you're basically doing everything short of exploitation.
And just to clarify there, with just a scanning tool, right, you're going to miss some stuff. I would imagine, like your scanner tools, maybe not going to find open S3 bucket, or if you've misconfigured a SaaS application, right? Like a lot of times that kind of stuff, the third parties that can be used to get into your environment would be out of scope, right?
Yes. There's a lot of other tools you can run too, just like some of the CMS scanners and stuff may find something with your WordPress that the vulnerability scanner didn't find. And one of the things I've seen too is I've seen some consulting companies that will run two separate vulnerability scanners. When I used to work for a bank, we outsourced our ATM pen tests, and they would run Nessus and OpenVOS to get two different views, because I've done pen tests before as a consultant where the customer was using Qualys and I was able to find something with Nessus that they didn't find. So using a variety of different scanners and different tools is very helpful. Even some of the auxiliary scanners in Metasploit can find things without actually exploiting things, go through, look for, FTP or other insecure protocols being used. So there's a wide range of tools that you can use to test for that. Sometimes that gets missed if you're just running a vulnerability scanner.
And then finally, I think we have to talk about the difference between a pen test and red team assessment.
Okay, so the difference between that is a pen test, you're looking for all the vulnerabilities that can be exploited, attempting to exploit those and do post-exploitation activities. With a red team exercise or adversary emulation, you're looking for one way in, you're going unannounced, you're doing something that would be equivalent to a breach. Going into a company with a pen test, you're announcing that the pen test is going on. With the red team operation, there's a control team that knows what's going on, usually the CISO, maybe some other management. A lot of cases, you're not telling the blue team manager because they may not want their team to look bad. It might tip them off. So you're looking, and the engagements are usually longer because you're having to go low and slow, as they say, and try to go undetected. With a pen test, you really don't have time to try to go undetected. With a red team operation, you're trying to go undetected and get in and see what you can do, and then even testing maybe things like data exfiltration. But one of my favorite quotes was from the founder of Dallas Hackers Association that said, red team tests the blue team. So you're not only testing the technology, you're also testing the response of the defenders.
Yeah.
Are they detecting this? What happens when they detect it? One of the best outcomes I've heard of a red team operation was this company had an IR firm on retainer in case there were any kind of breaches. And there was a red team operation going on. The blue team detected something malicious. So they called in the IR team. They're investigating it. Then they told the CISO, say, hey, we've got an active threat going on in our environment. We have the IR team in there. So the CISO came back and said, actually, they're authorized to be there. So that's a good outcome. Even though maybe they got a foothold in the environment, they were detected and taking steps
Maybe
to
spend a little extra money they weren't planning on.
Yes. Yeah. But it's almost, you think about disaster recovery and business continuity. I don't know if people still do those exercises or not.
Yeah.
But used to when people do that, that's a good way to test your incident response plan too, as well. What happens if this happens? If the threat actor, the consultant or tester gets a foothold, it's still valuable to see what you do after that. If whatever you're doing is not blocking it, then later on going back and figure out what to do to block those type of attacks. Kind of using the purple team methodology to go back and work on trying to find those different types of threats and be able to detect and block those. So that way in the future, reduce those type of risks.
Yeah. I mean, even if it is just a pen test, and your folks are not seeing accounts get created and accounts being abused and data being exfiltrated like that, that's still a big problem. I think that's one of the biggest frustrations I've had with pen tests is, you come back for year 5 to assess the children's hospital, and the accounts that the pen testers created on year 1 5 years ago are still there. And you start to question, like, did they even open the report? Did they even read the report? So that kind of leads me to, is part of the problem the reasons that people are buying pen tests and what those expectations are from the pen test when people purchase them?
I think a lot of it's the goal, not really defining the goal clearly, because a lot of people are doing it for compliance. And that's really what really helped the pen testing field grow, that market really grow, was because of compliance. Before that, people weren't doing it. Some of that's just through awareness, and some of it's just because they have to have the checkbox. And some people just feel like they got that checkbox, that's good enough. They're not really following through with the remediation. And it's kind of interesting. I know someone that from our Dallas-Fort Worth area that works in digital forensics, and he went from being a pen tester to going over and doing purely incident response and digital forensics because he got tired of doing pen tests, going back, like you said, same vulnerabilities are there later on.
It's depressing.
You're wasting your time. He felt like, I'm wasting my time. I want to go somewhere where it's needed. And, on an incident response, people are going to take care of it because it's, whereas the pen tester, they're not. So you see a lot of cases where they don't. I think it's just really, people need to get in that mindset of using it for what it's for. Make sure to clearly define those goals so you're getting more out of it. Maybe it's required for PCI, but if you do a good job of setting your goals, you're going to get more out of it than just the checkbox for PCI.
Yeah, one's a left of boom service and the other's a right of boom service, right?
Yeah.
I find that many organizations I've worked in confuse compliance with practice, like security practice. Like, as long as everybody's compliant, it's fine. It's like, you don't think your adversaries understand what compliance looks like versus protection. And I've had that conversation with. I worked at one company where the legal officer was running security, and I was like, maybe not the best choice, because with legal, you get compliance. You get, like, we checked the box, we covered our butt. You don't get, let's think outside the box, let's look at edge cases. Like, yeah, so I think it's a
Yeah.
common misconception, unfortunately.
You don't get that firefighter mentality with a chief legal officer being also the CISO. Yeah.
No.
So this talk that you're giving, you outline a few gaps in pen tests. So let's talk through that. Some of the key things you've seen, Philip, that are missing in a lot of pen tests that would maybe increase the quality or the success of them. And before we even dive into each of those, what does success look like for a pen test? What should some of these goals be for customers buying these?
Sure. And before I even get into that, just kind of to play off what we mentioned, the compliance thing, this is really what kind of drove a lot of the gaps, because people had, like, some people didn't have budgets for pen testing before PCI, but what happened is the scope got a lot more narrow, because previously, before, you had full scope pen tests, which included social engineering, even physical pen testing, and a lot of that. And it just really evolved. And so some of those are being missed out. So the goals of that should be not only trying to meet your compliance, but trying to make your environment more secure in the process. And one of the things I think too is really making sure to go through those reports with the defenders. And even I like the idea of purple teaming, or at least use that purple team mentality, even if it's not an official purple teaming exercise, is just working to really make sure those type of things are detected outside of just doing remediation, because you just do remediation, some of those things that could have led to an exploit could still be in play. So doing things like purple teaming are good ways to do, detection, see if you're detecting certain types of vulnerabilities. Are they able to run older versions of PowerShell in the systems, downgrade it? So making sure you're not only just remediating, but also trying to remove some of those other threats along the way. I think that's what's successful. And for a successful pen test, I think you need to use the different types of methods and not just be so narrow focused. Because one of the things that happens is a lot of companies, for their phishing campaigns now, a lot of people are just relying on some canned tool that you go through, and it's really testing security awareness. They're not testing what happens if someone clicks on malware or ransomware. They're not testing that, and that's a big flaw in that thinking, because what happens if that does happen? So you have the insider threat coming into play, whether it's not actually someone internally doing something malicious. They could click on ransomware malicious file. And so really you need to test what happens if someone clicks on these links. And I think during your assessments, it'd be a good idea, if you're doing a phishing campaign, someone doesn't click on the malware, I think you should go through and do a portion of that pen test where you're clicking on that malware or ransomware and doing a test from that host to see what is available, because wherever that ransomware or malware is being executed is running at the level of privilege of that person. So they've got some level of access to the network. And another way you could approach that as well, and that I think is a very good way of doing assessments, is doing an assumed breach type of test. Because typically in the past, here's where one of the other gaps come into play. Pen test company comes in, EDR is really set really well. They've got everything really secured. They're not able to get a foothold. They write up a report, document what vulnerabilities they had, and move along. But somewhere along the way, someone came with the great idea of doing assumed breach, where you've got low-level credentials and see if they can do privilege escalation, see what they can access. Because it's not always,
or insider
doesn't
threat,
always,
right?
Yeah, doesn't always require domain admin or root to be able to get access to the crown jewels. So you need to see what's accessible.
Yeah, we're going to talk about an insider threat situation today in the news segment.
But yeah, that's
I
one of the
always
things that
love
people
going-
miss.
I always love going places with my husband, because he spent years as a commercial HVAC mechanic. And so the physical penetration part of it is always something he's like, no, you can literally just climb up that ladder, drop down the roof, and their server room is right there and you can get into it. Because he did all the big data centers in the Bay Area, all of that. And so I fully agree that there's a difference between theater and practice. And, we
Yeah.
see this, I see this in procurement a lot too, where, I've had vendors try to negotiate unlimited liability for another vendor. And it's like, that might make you sleep better at night, but if that vendor really causes hundreds of millions in damage, you're not going to recoup that just because your contract says it wasn't your fault. So yeah, I really wish we could get better at where the theory meets actual practice, because I don't think most adversaries are just checking the box and making sure they try to get in the ways that they know of.
And I try to tell folks, I'm like, when you get a pen test, a lot of times it's their first pen test. I'm like, when you get a pen test, you're going to get a report of things that you're going to have to fix. And by the way, your clients and your customers are going to ask for that report. So you better fix them. So just make sure you're prepped for, you know what you're getting into here.
Yeah, something that bugged me as well is, like, I would put more systemic stuff on there. If I remember doing a pen test, and it was like 8 months before Windows XP was going to go out of service. And I was like, yeah, I noticed 80% of your systems, all your call center systems, are running XP, and none of them have the hardware to upgrade to Windows 7. So that went on the pen test report, that they were not prepared. They had tech debt problem, and they were not going to be prepared to upgrade that and get rid of those systems. So, yeah, I mean, it's not good if you haven't patched for Eternal Blue, but also I'm interested in why didn't that get patched? Why is that sat there, for however many years it's been, 8 years, 7 years, since that patch became available.
That
What's the
reminds
price
me of
tag to
process
fix it?
failure.
Yeah.
that
What's the
reminds me
price
of
tag to
another
fix it?
pet. That reminds me of another pet peeve I have is risk acceptance. Sometimes that's abused. And one of the most ridiculous risk acceptances I ever had, I did an external pen test. I got command line access to the Microsoft SQL server. They had XP command shell enabled from the internet, and the customer filed a risk acceptance because it was a dev box. And I was able to dump the password hash, crack it with John the Ripper in less than 30 seconds. The password was password, all lowercase, and the number 1. And they filed a risk acceptance because it was a dev box.
I'm getting heated
Wow.
because I've had so many yelling arguments. Like, I very rarely raise my voice in arguments, but dev boxes without EDR is one of the things that makes me really angry. And they're everywhere. They're in every environment. Everybody has that special senior dev that has the Windows laptop that's not controlled because they don't want to use Mac. And oh my gosh, like those, as a business, there's so much risk that you can't control. Right. And then it's like, to your point, the accepted risk of like, oh no, this is fine. This is fine. It's just...
Guess how the Circle CI breach happened and the LastPass breach. Both engineer MacBooks, right? And guess what? They make info stealers for MacBooks. And there's all kinds of creds on those dev engineer machines that you can leverage to get in and do stuff. So what's the fix here? As we wrap up the conversation here, how do we battle, the $2,500 pen test? That's really just a vulnerability scan. Like, is it? It seems like a lot of these problems are the same. Like, I've had this conversation back when I was a pen tester. I think 2012 I was having this conversation, and I feel like we're still having it today. Is it just the wrong incentives? Is it because it is a checkbox for so many organizations?
And can I ask,
if
is
they
it
don't
internal
care
or external? Like, is it a lack of alignment between stakeholders internal, or is it a lack of alignment internal and external? Like, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it could be a combination of those. A lot of times just getting, on the same page, because one of the interesting exercises I went through for the company was the large global consumer product company was there were times where there was collaboration and needed to be more of that because the audit people are kind of their own silo outside of cybersecurity, but we got together on like an Active Directory pen test and they just so happened to be doing an audit of the Windows environment. And so we kind of worked together in just some cases like they were just kind of missing the technology piece, but working with someone with a tech background was able to help them out. But getting on the same page, getting past compliance, I guess a lot of it too is getting leadership and the tech folks to be able to speak the same language. I think probably as technical people, we need to learn to speak more in risk so we can kind of share those goals better to get buy-in, because we really need to start taking this stuff seriously. It's not just a checkbox. You need to make sure you're doing these pen tests. They really need to be done more frequently, because once a year is not enough. I had a customer once where I went in, performed the pen test. They had a 90-day retest, came back 90 days later. They remediated all the critical highs and mediums, but within that 90 days, someone figured out how to exploit one of those low criticality vulnerabilities. They weren't breached, but when I came back and I was running my initial scans to see if they remediated those items, and I noticed all of a sudden that this same target is now critical. And so if they hadn't had that 90-day retest, it would have been open for another year or longer, depending on when the pen test was done again. So really need to be doing this more frequently. Some of the continuous pen test options and some of the automated pen testing options are good. The automation's good, but it's not a complete replacement. You still need someone, people testing, making sure that it's not, whatever it finds is not a false positive, or it's not missing false negatives, because even with some of the automated systems, it's only finding what is built into that system. Good pen testers can find 0 days or find other things that a vulnerability scanner or automated testing solution may not be able to find.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Phillip, it's been great having you on the show today. Thanks for coming on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Well, thanks. It's been an honor. Great chatting with you guys, and I look forward to seeing you all in person the next time.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll see each other at RSA at the very least, hopefully.
Not sure I'll be at RSA yet, but I'm still looking for an employer that will send me there, because I'm kind of between jobs.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah, it helps if somebody's paying for you to go when the hotels are $700 a night. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about why your cloud is a mess and how to clean it up with Marina Seagull from Tam Noon.